The transport ship carrying the human delegation emerged from faster-than-light travel and drifted toward the massive station hanging in space above. Velis Prime, like a jewel catching starlight from 3 different suns, Captain Katie Morrison stood at attention in the cargo bay as the docking clamps engaged with a metallic thud that echoed through the hull and made the younger diplomats jump nervously. Her armor was a matte gray composite that had seen action in the outer colonies during the resource conflicts and bore the scars to prove it with darker patches where emergency sealant had covered breaches. Ambassador Lauren Clark approached with that particular walk she used when about to deliver orders Katie would not like and stopped just close enough to speak without others hearing. "Captain, I need you to understand how important this summit is for humanity," Clark said while adjusting her formal diplomatic robes that seemed too delicate for someone who had spent 2 decades negotiating with hostile governments. Back on Earth, Katie kept her eyes forward and her voice neutral in the way military training had drilled into her bones. "I understand, Ambassador," she replied. "The Galactic Council rarely invites new species to these gatherings." Clark continued as though Katie had not spoken. "We have one chance to make a good impression and secure trade agreements that will feed billions of people back home." "Yes, ma'am," Clark sighed. "In that way mothers do when their children refuse to see reason. Then please try not to look so aggressive," she said before walking away to join the other diplomats, who were practicing their greeting gestures for the 40th time. Commander Ryan Webb emerged from the cockpit and came to stand beside Katie with his hands clasped behind his back in mirror of her own posture. "She means well," he said quietly. "I know, sir. The politicians back home are nervous," Webb continued while watching the docking procedures through the viewport. "First contact with 40 different alien civilizations all at once makes everyone jumpy, and they want this to go smoothly." Katie said nothing because there was nothing to say that would change the reality of their situation. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure and revealed a corridor that stretched beyond what human eyes could properly focus on, with walls that seemed to shift between solid and transparent. Depending on the angle, a delegation of tall, crystalline beings waited to greet them and their bodies refracted light into rainbow patterns that danced across every surface. "Welcome to the Velis Prime Summit Station," one of them said in perfect English that somehow came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We are honored to host humanity's first attendance at the Council gathering." Ambassador Clark stepped forward and performed the formal greeting she had practiced. The crystalline The being seemed pleased, though Katie could not read emotions on a face that had no features she recognized. "Please follow us to the central hall, where the opening ceremonies will begin shortly," the being said before turning and gliding down the corridor without apparent effort. The human delegation followed, and Katie took up position at the rear where she could watch everything and everyone. The station interior defied simple description, with architecture that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the 3 Katie was comfortable with. Doors appeared where walls had been moments before, and hallways curved in directions that made her inner ear protest. Other delegations filled the corridors and represented forms of life Katie had only seen in classified briefings. There were the Viridians, who stood 3 meters tall with scaled skin that ranged from deep purple to bright orange and wore elaborate armor that seemed to be grown rather than forged. The insectoid chorus moved in perfect synchronization, as though controlled by a single mind, and chittered to each other in harmonics that set Katie's teeth on edge. Floating spheres of contained energy drifted past, and Katie's suit sensors registered them as living beings, though how remained a mystery. Every species seemed to stare at the human delegation, and Katie felt the weight of those alien gazes measuring them and finding them wanting. The central hall opened up into a space so vast that Katie could not see the far walls through the assembled crowds. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species filled the chamber, and all conversation stopped as the humans Entered Ambassador Clark maintained her diplomatic smile, but Katie saw the tension in her shoulders. A Viridian warrior approached with heavy footsteps that shook the floor. His armor was a deep crimson color that seemed to pulse with inner light, and covered him from head to foot in overlapping plates. "I am Vexter of the Viridian Empire," he announced in a voice like grinding stones. "Ambassador of the 4th Legion, an honored guest of this summit." Clark performed another formal greeting. "I am Ambassador Lauren Clark, representing the United Earth Government," she said. "We are grateful for the Council's invitation." Vexter looked past her to Katie, and his eyes narrowed in what might have been amusement or contempt. "Your warrior maintains combat readiness," he observed. Is humanity expecting conflict at a peace gathering?" Clark glanced back at Katie before responding. "Captain Morrison is our security chief and follows standard protocols." "Interesting," Vexter said while beginning to remove his own armor. "With practiced movements. The tradition here is that all warriors present themselves without arms or armor during the summit as a gesture of trust and peaceful intention." He placed each piece of armor carefully on a hovering platform that appeared beside him. Beneath the war gear, he wore robes of shimmering fabric that caught the light. Around them, other species were doing the same, and the sound of armor being removed filled the hall like mechanical rain. Katie watched the Viridian delegation disarm completely and noted where they placed their weapons on the floating platforms. Her tactical display highlighted security gaps in the room and flagged 3 separate exits that had no guards. Vexter turned his full attention to Katie and smiled in a way that showed too many teeth. "Surely the human warrior will join us in this tradition," he said loudly enough that nearby delegations turned to watch. "It would be most unfortunate if humanity chose to insult the Council by implying we cannot be trusted." Katie felt dozens of eyes on her and kept her voice steady. "I respectfully maintain my current posture," she said. The hall went quiet in a way that felt dangerous. Vexter's smile widened. "You refuse?" he asked with what sounded like delight. "The weak little human refuses our most basic custom of peaceful gathering." Laughter rippled through the assembled aliens, and Katie heard the high-pitched keening of the chorus and the deep rumbling of species she could not identify. Ambassador Clark stepped closer to Katie and spoke through clenched teeth. "Captain, this is not the time for military stubbornness. Please remove your armor." Katie met her superior's eyes. "Ma'am, I have reviewed the station security protocols and identified 17 vulnerabilities in the defensive systems," she said quietly. "My analysis suggests—" "Your analysis is not needed here," Clark interrupted. "What is needed is diplomatic cooperation." The laughter continued and grew louder as other species joined in the mockery. Katie stood perfectly still and let the sound wash over her while her helmet display continued flagging security concerns. Commander Webb approached, looking uncomfortable. "Captain Morrison, report to me after the ceremony," he said formally. Katie knew what that meant. She was about to receive official orders to remove her armor and fall in line. The crystalline being who had greeted them earlier materialized beside the group. "Perhaps the human warrior is simply afraid," it suggested in that omnidirectional voice. "Some species find it difficult to trust others." More laughter echoed through the chamber. Katie said nothing and kept her hands relaxed at her sides. Vexter leaned down until his face was level with Katie's helmet. "Hide behind your metal, little human," he said. "We shall see how long your fear sustains you, while the rest of us move forward in trust and fellowship." He turned away dismissively, and the crowd's attention shifted to the next arrival. Ambassador Clark gave Katie one last look of disappointment before moving to join the other diplomats. Katie remained at her post and watched the security feeds on her heads-up display. Something felt wrong about this station, and she could not identify exactly what. The energy signatures were off by 0.3% from standard readings. The maintenance schedules showed gaps that made no sense, and someone had disabled the automated security systems in sections. 7 through 12. She tagged each anomaly and filed it for later review. The opening ceremony began with speeches in languages Katie did not understand. She stood alone at the edge of the hall in full combat armor, the only armed person in a room full of hundreds, and she knew they were all laughing at her. The second day of the summit dawned with artificial light that gradually increased to mimic a sun Katie had never seen before. She had spent the night reviewing security footage from cameras that covered maybe 30% of the station, and, finding that inadequate for proper protection, Commander Webb had called her to his quarters late in the evening and delivered the expected speech about cooperation and following diplomatic protocols. Katie had listened without comment and then returned to her post. She still wore her armor. The morning session took place in a garden chamber where alien plants grew in impossible configurations and released scents that made Katie's filters work overtime. Ambassador Clark was deep in negotiation with a delegation of beings that looked like walking coral and seemed genuinely interested in human agricultural techniques. Katie stood 20 meters away and monitored the room. Vexter entered with his entourage of Viridian warriors, all wearing their ceremonial robes without armor. They carried themselves with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat. "The frightened human still hides," Vexter announced to his companions loudly enough that half the garden turned to look. His warriors laughed in synchronized beats that sounded like war drums. One of them approached Katie with the swaggering walk of someone seeking confrontation. "Is it true that humans come from a weak world with gentle weather?" the Viridian asked. His scales were a bright orange that Katie's database identified as juvenile coloring. "Earth has its challenges," Katie replied neutrally. "Challenges," the young warrior repeated and turned to his fellows. "They call their soft world challenging." More laughter rippled through the Viridian group. Vexter joined them and studied Katie with the air of someone examining an interesting insect. "This afternoon we shall demonstrate proper warrior traditions," he said. "Perhaps watching true fighters will inspire the human to shed her shell of fear." Katie said nothing and maintained her scan of the garden perimeter. Her sensors picked up an energy fluctuation in the eastern corridor that lasted 3 seconds before disappearing. She tagged it and continued her sweep. The afternoon demonstration took place in an arena that could have held 10,000 spectators, though only a few hundred attended. The Viridians had set up elaborate combat displays. They fought in pairs with weapons that crackled with energy and moved with speed that Katie's armor barely tracked. The crowd cheered as warriors clashed in choreographed battles that showed off strength and skill. Vexter stood in the center ring and raised his arms for silence. "Combat is the crucible that forges true warriors," he declared. "We Viridians have fought for 10,000 years and won glory across 100 systems." He pointed directly at Katie, who stood in the observer section. "Yet here stands one who claims the title of warrior while refusing to face the world without hiding." The crowd's attention shifted to Katie like a physical weight. "I challenge the human," Vexter continued. "Remove your armor and join us in the arena for a simple demonstration of skill. Show us that humanity deserves respect." Katie felt Ambassador Clark's horrified stare from across the arena. Commander Webb stood and was about to speak when Katie activated her external speakers. "I respectfully decline," she said clearly. The crowd erupted in a mixture of shock and amusement. Vexter's expression shifted to something Katie recognized from every bully she had ever encountered: genuine anger mixed with theatrical outrage. "Coward," he said simply. The word hung in the air and was picked up by other species, who began chanting it in their own languages. Katie had been called worse during the colony conflicts and stood perfectly still, a crystalline being floated down from the upper tiers. "Perhaps the human lacks the capacity for honor," it suggested. "Some primitive species cannot grasp concepts beyond basic survival." The telepathic races in attendance broadcast their contempt, and Katie felt it like insects crawling across her mind. Despite her helmet's shielding, She had been trained to resist psionic interference, but the sheer number of minds pressing against hers made concentration difficult. Ambassador Clark left the arena looking furious. The demonstrations continued, but Katie's attention was elsewhere. Her sensors had picked up the same energy fluctuation from earlier, and this time she triangulated its source to a maintenance corridor. In Section 9, she quietly sent a request to access that area's security footage. The response came back that those cameras were offline for scheduled maintenance. Katie checked the maintenance schedule. No work was logged for Section 9. She flagged it as priority and continued monitoring. That evening, the delegations gathered for a formal dinner in the hall, where tables floated at different heights and gravity. Seemed optional. Katie stood against the wall and watched the humans try to eat while sitting on chairs that drifted slowly in circles. The mockery had evolved from open laughter to pointed whispers and meaningful glances. Several delegations had stopped speaking to the human representatives entirely. Ambassador Clark's negotiations had stalled as trading partners suddenly found reasons to delay discussions. A young human diplomat named Chris Bennett approached Kitty during a break in the meal service. He was fresh from Earth's diplomatic academy and still believed in the goodness of cooperation. "Captain, I know you have your reasons," he said quietly. "But is your honor really worth destroying our chance at these treaties?" Katie looked at him and saw genuine concern rather than criticism. "Chris, have you noticed anything strange about the station?" she asked. He blinked in confusion at the change of subject. "Strange how?" "Energy readings that do not match the baseline," Katie said. "Security systems offline in multiple sections, without logged maintenance. Meeting schedules that overlap in impossible ways." Chris frowned and thought about it. "Actually, yes," he said slowly. "I saw 3 different delegations leaving the same conference room at odd hours. They all claimed to be going to different places, but I could have sworn they were heading the same direction." Katie felt something click into place. "Which delegations?" she asked. Chris listed them, and Katie's database cross-referenced their political alignments. They had nothing in common except a history of using mercenary forces for conflicts they wanted to keep at arm's length. "Thank you, Chris," Katie said. "Please keep this conversation between us." He nodded and returned to the floating tables looking thoughtful. Katie accessed the station's public records and began pulling data on crew manifests and supply deliveries. Something was happening here beneath the surface of diplomatic pleasantries. The dinner ended with speeches about cooperation and unity. Katie noted that humanity was not mentioned in any of them. As the crowd dispersed, she caught sight of a service corridor door closing. Her thermal imaging picked up 3 heat signatures moving quickly through an area marked as restricted. She followed at a distance and kept her armor stealth systems active. The signatures led to an abandoned docking bay in Section 7, where no ships were supposed to be. Katie accessed the bay's external cameras and saw nothing, but her suit's passive sensors detected metallic mass consistent with a medium-sized vessel. Someone had placed a stealth field over the entire bay. She recorded everything and began backing away carefully. A hand fell on her shoulder and spun her around. Vexter stood there without his entourage, and his expression was unreadable. "Following us, human?" he asked quietly. Katie's hand moved to her sidearm but did not draw it. "Performing my duties," she replied. "Your duties seem to include spying on other delegations. My duties include ensuring the safety of my people." Vexter studied her for a long moment. "You trust no one," he observed. "I trust what I can verify." He laughed, without humor. "Perhaps you are not a coward after all," he said. "Simply paranoid beyond reason." He walked away and left Katie standing in the corridor. She waited until he was gone before returning to her quarters. Commander Webb was waiting outside her door. "Captain, we need to talk," he said inside. Katie presented her findings about the energy signatures and unauthorized meetings and the stealth Ship in Bay 7 Webb listened, and his expression grew more troubled with each detail. Katie, this could all be explained by diplomatic back-channel negotiations, he said finally. That is how these summits work, with secret meetings and careful positioning. Sir, the security systems could be explained by this station's alien technology not matching our expectations. He stood and placed a hand on her armored shoulder. I believe you are seeing threats that are not there because you are trained to expect them, he said gently. Please try to relax and trust that we are safe here. Katie wanted to argue but recognized the futility. Webb left, and she sat alone reviewing her data. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but she had no proof, only suspicions and anomalies that could be explained away. She spent the night running probability scenarios, and all of them ended badly. The third night brought a grand reception to celebrate preliminary treaty agreements between 12 different species. The main hall had been transformed into something resembling a nebula with lights that swirled in patterns matching distant galaxies and music that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Ambassador Clark wore her finest diplomatic robes and looked genuinely happy for the first time. Since arriving at the station, she had secured a trade agreement with the Coral beings that would bring new water purification technology to Earth. Commander Webb was deep in conversation with military attaches from species Katie did not recognize. Chris Bennett stood near the refreshment table, trying to figure out which alien foods were safe for human consumption. Katie maintained her position near the human delegation and watched everything. Her armor felt heavier than usual after 3 days of constant wear. The mockery had continued throughout the day, but had become almost routine. Vexter and his warriors had staged another demonstration where they pointedly invited every species, except humanity, to participate. The crystalline beings had begun referring to Katie as the fearful one in their broadcasts. Even some of the human diplomats had started giving her looks that mixed embarrassment with resentment. But Katie's sensors continued picking up anomalies. The stealth ship in Bay 7 had not moved Section 12 security. Systems had gone offline that afternoon, and she had counted 17 unauthorized personnel movements through restricted corridors. The reception reached its peak, with speeches about cooperation and a future of shared prosperity. Ambassador Clark was invited to speak and talked about humanity's hopes for peaceful integration into galactic society. Katie scanned the crowd and noted positions of all exits. Her tactical display highlighted the Viridian delegation scattered throughout the room. The crystalline beings floated near the ceiling. The insectoid chorus had formed a living wall near the northern entrance. Everything seemed normal. Then her threat detector screamed a warning directly into her skull. Katie spun toward the eastern wall and saw it buckle inward. She opened her mouth to shout a warning, but the explosion drowned out everything. The wall exploded in a shower of metal and composite material. Figures in heavy combat armor poured through the breach, moving with military precision. Katie's database identified them instantly from their distinctive bone-white armor and organic weapons. Kresha, mercenary species everyone thought had gone extinct 50 years ago. The hall erupted into chaos as unarmed diplomats scattered. The Kresh opened fire with weapons that spat crystallized toxins. 3 delegates fell screaming as the projectiles dissolved through their flesh. Katie was already moving. Her rifle came up and she put 2 rounds through the nearest Kresh soldier's helmet. The mercenary dropped, and she shifted to the next target. Get down, she roared at the humans. Ambassador Clark stood frozen in shock. Katie grabbed her and physically threw her behind an overturned table. More Kresh flooded through the breach. A second explosion opened the western wall, and another squad entered. They moved like professionals who had done this 1,000 times before. Katie's armor counted 40 hostiles and climbing. She activated her emergency beacon and sent a priority signal to the human ships in orbit. Then she opened fire. The Kresh had not expected armed resistance. Their first wave took casualties as Katie's rifle found targets. With mechanical precision, she moved laterally, keeping between the attackers and the civilian delegates. A crystalline being tried to manifest its defensive form, but took 3 hits before completing the transformation. It shattered like glass, and the pieces dissolved into light. Vexter roared in fury and charged the nearest. Kresh with his bare hands. He was magnificent and brave and completely outmatched. The Kresh soldier hit him with a weapon that discharged electricity through his body. The Viridian warrior fell convulsing. Katie adjusted her aim and took down the Kresh. Before it could finish him, she grabbed Vexter's collar and dragged him behind cover. "Stay down," she ordered. More delegates were falling. Insectoid chorus tried to form a defensive barrier, but their exoskeletons could not stop. Kresh weapons. Katie's tactical display showed she was the only armed defender in the entire hall. She made a decision. "Everyone to the south exit," she shouted. "Move now." She laid down covering fire and burned through half her ammunition in seconds. The delegates who could still move began crawling toward the indicated exit. Katie repositioned and kept firing. Her armor shields absorbed hits that would have killed her. The Kresh adapted and began flanking. Katie threw a flashbang and used the confusion to fall back. She reached the fleeing delegates and herded them like sheep. "Faster," she urged. A young diplomat from the coral species stumbled. Katie hauled them upright with one hand while firing with the other. The Kresh pursued but were slowed by their own dead. Katie reached the exit and found it. Sealed emergency lockdown protocols. She accessed the station security systems and her clearance codes were rejected. Someone had locked them in deliberately. Katie switched to her armor's cutting tools and began burning through the door. The Kresh were 30 meters away and closing 20 meters. The door sparked and began to fail 10 meters. Katie kicked the weakened door and it flew off its hinges. "Through now," she commanded. The delegates poured into the corridor. Katie positioned herself in the doorway and became one-woman barricade. The Kresh opened fire and her shields flared. She returned fire and dropped 3 more. Her ammunition counter flashed amber. 40% remaining. The delegates cleared the kill zone and Katie fell back. She sealed the corridor behind her with an emergency bulkhead. It would hold for maybe 2 minutes. "Where can we go?" Ambassador Clark asked. Her perfect diplomatic composure had cracked and fear showed through. Katie consulted her maps. "Bay 3 has escape pods," she said, "but we need to cross Section 8. "That is where the security systems are offline," Chris Bennett said. He had blood running down his face from a cut, but seemed otherwise functional. "Yes," Katie confirmed. They moved as a group with Katie at point. Her sensors showed Kresh teams moving through the station in coordinated patterns. This was not a random raid. They were hunting specific targets. Katie led the group through maintenance corridors that her earlier scouting had mapped. They encountered 2 Kresh scouts. Katie put them down before they could transmit their position. Vexter followed behind her, looking shaken. His ceremonial robes were torn and scorched. "You saved my life," he said quietly later. Katie replied. They reached Section 8 and Katie's worst fears were confirmed. A full Kresh company had set up a command post. She counted at least 60 soldiers between her group and the escape pods. "We cannot go through them," Chris said. Katie studied the tactical situation. He was right. She keyed her communications and tried to reach Commander Webstatic answered her. The Kresh were jamming all frequencies, but her emergency beacon was still transmitting on military channels. Help would come if they could survive long enough. An explosion rocked the corridor behind them. The Kresh had breached the bulkhead faster than expected. Katie made another decision. "A-12, she said. "There is a communications array we can use to coordinate with our ships." The group changed direction. Katie's ammunition counter hit 20%. She had maybe 50 rounds left. Against hundreds of enemies, they passed through a garden chamber and Katie saw bodies, delegates who had not made it to cover. species. She had never learned the names of all dead Vexter saw them too, and his face hardened. "This is my fault," he said. "I pushed for the disarmament." Tradition. Katie glanced at him. "Fix it later," she said. "Survive now." They reached Bay 12, and Katie accessed the communications array. Her clearance worked, and she established a connection to the human destroyer Defiant in orbit. "This is Captain Katie Morrison," she transmitted. "Station is under attack by Kresh mercenaries. Multiple casualties. Request immediate military intervention." The response came through crisp and clear. "Morrison, this is Defiant Actual." A voice said, "We read your beacon and are launching Marines now. ETA 12 minutes. Can you hold?" Katie looked at her ammunition counter, and the 43 terrified. Delegates huddled in the bay, then at the Kresh forces converging. "On their position. We will find out," she replied. The first Kresh team entered the bay. Katie opened fire, and the real fight began. The bay offered limited cover with only cargo containers and service equipment to hide. Behind, Katie positioned herself at a choke point where the main corridor fed into the larger space. The first Kresh squad thought they were facing one isolated human. They learned different when Katie dropped 4 of them in 3 seconds. Her rifle barked in controlled bursts, and each shot found its target. The Kresh fell back and regrouped. Katie used the pause to check her perimeter ambassador. Clark was organizing the civilians into the most protected corner. Chris Bennett had found a medical kit and was treating wounded. Vexter stood near Katie, looking frustrated without his armor or weapons. "I can fight," he said. Katie pointed to a fallen Kresh soldier. "Take his weapon," she ordered. The Viridian warrior grabbed the organic rifle and tested its weight. "This will do," he said grimly. The Kresh came again with better tactics. They threw grenades that exploded in bursts of shrapnel. Katie's shields absorbed the worst but damage. Alerts flickered across her display. She returned fire and forced them back again. Her ammunition counter dropped to 15%. "How long until your ships arrive?" Vexter asked while taking position beside her. 10 minutes, Katie replied. "Can we hold that long?" Katie did not answer because she did not know. The Kresh changed their approach and began trying to flank through service ducts. Katie's sensors picked up movement above and to the sides. "They are coming through the walls," she warned. Vexter nodded and moved to cover the left flank. A bay panel exploded outward, and 2 Kresh dropped into the bay. Katie spun and fired. One went down, but the other reached cover. More panels burst open. The Kresh were inside the perimeter. Katie switched to her sidearm and engaged at close range. The fighting became brutal and personal. Kresh soldier lunged at her with a blade. Katie blocked with her armored forearm and shot him in the chest. Another came from behind. Vexter roared and clubbed it with the rifle butt. Katie finished it with a headshot. "Thank you," she said. "We are even," Vexter replied. The bay descended into chaos. Katie fought with cold efficiency that came from years of training. Every movement was calculated, every shot placed with precision. But the Kresh kept coming. Her ammunition counter hit 5%. She switched magazines and pulled her last spare 30 rounds left against an enemy that seemed endless. Crystalline being Katie had not realized survived floated into the fight. It manifested its defensive form and created a shield of solidified light. The barrier absorbed Kresh fire and bought precious seconds. "Thank you," Katie shouted. The being said nothing but held the shield. Katie used the cover to reposition. She climbed onto a cargo container and gained a height advantage from there. She could see the whole bay. The Kresh were massing for a major push. She counted at least 30 soldiers preparing to charge. Her weapons would not stop that many. Katie activated her helmet's external speakers at maximum volume. "I am Captain Katie Morrison of the United Earth Government," she announced. "You are attacking diplomats under interstellar protection. Surrender now, and you will be treated fairly." The Kresh commander stepped forward. His armor was decorated with kill marks that covered every surface. "One human thinks to order us?" he said in accented but clear English. "You die now, little warrior. Then come and try." Katie replied. The crash charged. Katie opened fire and made every shot. Count, she dropped 6 before her rifle clicked empty. She drew her sidearm and continued firing. 3 more fell. The distance closed to 10 meters. 5 meters, Vexter appeared beside her and fired the captured crash weapon, the Viridian. Warrior fought with fury born of shame. He had failed to protect his fellow delegates. Now he sought redemption. Together they held the line. But the crash kept coming. Katie's sidearm ran dry. She used it as a club and felt bone crack. Under the impact, a crash blade slashed across her armor and warning lights flared. Hull breach in left side, structural integrity at 60%. Katie grabbed the blade and ripped it from the soldier's grip. She drove it into another attacker. The fighting became desperate and savage. Katie's training took over and she moved. On instinct, block, strike, move, never stop moving. A crash. Soldier got behind her. She felt the impact as it fired at point-blank range her. Shields failed completely. The shot punched through her back armor, but the angle was wrong. It missed her spine by centimeters. Pain exploded through her body. Katie ignored it and spun. She caught the soldier's weapon and broke its neck. With her armored gauntlet, blood ran down inside her suit. Her medical systems activated and began pumping combat drugs into her system. The pain receded to a distant throb. Katie kept fighting. Time lost meaning. There was only the next enemy, the next threat. The next moment of survival, Vexter went down with a crash. Blade in his shoulder, Katie stood over him and held the position alone. Her armor was failing, multiple breaches. Shields offline power at 30%, but she did not stop, could not stop. Behind her were 43 beings who trusted her to keep them alive. She would not fail them. The crash. Commander appeared through the smoke. He was massive, even by their standards, covered in the blood of those he had killed today. "Impressive human," he said while approaching. "You have earned a warrior's death." Katie's hands were empty of weapons. Her armor barely functioned, but she straightened and faced him. "Come and deliver it." "Then," she said. The commander raised his weapon. Then the wall exploded inward. Human Marines in powered armor poured through the breach. They moved like a force of nature. Their weapons lit up the bay with sustained fire. The crash were caught between Katie's position and the Marine assault. They lasted seconds. The commander tried to fight but took rounds from 3 different directions. He fell without ceremony. A Marine sergeant approached Katie. "Captain Morrison?" he asked. "Reporting," Katie replied. Then her legs gave out. The sergeant caught her before she hit the ground. "Medic," he shouted. "We have casualties." Katie's vision blurred. The combat drugs were wearing off. The delegates, she managed. All secure, ma'am, the sergeant assured her. "You held the line. We just cleaned up." Katie let herself relax for the first time in hours. A combat medic appeared and began working on her injuries. "You have a hole through your back," he said, conversationally. "Also 3 cracked ribs and massive bruising. How are you still conscious?" "Stubbornness," Katie replied. The medic laughed. "Fair enough." More Marines secured the bay. Katie watched them work with professional efficiency. Commander Webb appeared, looking shaken but alive. "Captain, I owe you an apology," he said. "You were right about everything." Katie wanted to respond, but unconsciousness was claiming her. The last thing she heard was the medic saying her vitals were stabilizing. Then darkness took her. When she woke, she was in the Defiance medical bay. Her armor had been removed. She lay in a hospital bed with monitors beeping steadily. Ambassador Clark sat in a chair nearby. "Welcome back," Clark said softly. "How long?" Katie asked. 6 hours, Clark replied. "The station has been secured and the crash were eliminated or captured." Katie tried to sit up, but pain stopped her. "The delegates?" 43 survived because of you," Clark said. plus another 22 from other sections that the Marines found. Total casualties were 31 dead. Katie absorbed that number, 31 beings who would never go home. It could have been much worse, Clark continued. The Kresh planned to kill everyone and blame it on humans. We found evidence of a conspiracy involving 3 species and one of the crystalline beings. They wanted to destabilize the summit. Katie closed her eyes. I should have pushed harder, she said. You did exactly what needed to be done, Clark replied firmly. You saved my life and dozens of others. That is all that matters. Katie did not feel like a hero. She felt tired and hurt, but alive, and so were the people she had sworn to protect. Katie spent 2 days in medical recovery while the Defiance doctors rebuilt her damaged tissue. The hole through her back had somehow missed every vital organ. The doctors called it miraculous. Katie called it luck and did not think too hard about how close she had come to dying. On the 3rd day, she was cleared to leave the medical bay with strict orders not to engage in combat operations for at least 2 weeks. She walked slowly through the Defiance corridors and felt the stares of the crew. They whispered as she passed, but the whispers were different now. Respectful, admiring, she found Commander Webb in the Tactical Operations Center reviewing security footage from the station. He stood when she entered. Captain Morrison, he said formally, you should be resting. I have rested enough, sir, Katie replied. Webb gestured to a chair, and she sat carefully. Her ribs still ached despite the medical work. I wanted to apologize properly, Webb said. You identified multiple security risks, and I dismissed them as paranoia. 31 beings died because I did not listen. Katie shook her head. Sir, you made decisions based on the information available and the political requirements of the mission. That is what commanders do. It does not make me feel better, Webb admitted, but thank you for saying it. He pulled up files on his display. The investigation has uncovered the full conspiracy, he said. 3 minor species wanted to disrupt the summit because they opposed some of the proposed treaties. They hired the Kresh, who were supposed to make it look like humanity launched an attack. That is why they wanted everyone disarmed. Katie said, maximum casualties with no resistance. Exactly, Webb confirmed. Your refusal to remove your armor ruined their entire plan. They could not make it look like human aggression when you were clearly defending people. Katie absorbed that information. Her stubbornness had saved more than just the delegates in her immediate vicinity. It had prevented a war. The Galactic Council wants to see you, Webb continued. They are holding a formal session this afternoon on the station. Katie felt her stomach tighten. I am not much for formal ceremonies, sir, Webb smiled. I do not think you have a choice this time. The station had been repaired with shocking speed. Alien technology apparently made rebuilding damaged sections much easier than human methods allowed. Katie walked through corridors that showed no sign of the battle 3 days earlier. She wore a fresh uniform, but still felt underdressed without her armor. The doctors had forbidden her from wearing the damaged suit until repairs were completed. Ambassador Clark met her outside the council chamber. Are you ready? Clark asked. Not really, Katie admitted. Clark smiled. Good, she said. Confidence would make this seem rehearsed. They entered together. The council chamber was filled with delegates from every species at the summit. All eyes turned to Katie as she walked to the center of the room. Vexter stood near the front with his arm in a regeneration sleeve. The crystalline beings floated overhead. Even the insectoid chorus had gathered. Katie stopped at the indicated position and stood at attention. Council elder of a species Katie did not recognize floated forward. It looked like a collection of silver threads, woven into a vaguely humanoid shape. Captain Katie Morrison, it said in a voice like wind chimes. This council has reviewed the events of 3 days past. We have examined all evidence and heard testimony from 43 survivors. The elder paused. We owe you an apology, it continued. Many of us mocked your caution and questioned your courage. We were wrong. Katie said nothing. Your vigilance prevented a massacre, the elder went on. Your skill preserved lives. When all seemed lost, your dedication to duty saved not just humans, but representatives of 17 different species. We honor you. The entire assembly rose or floated or shifted in whatever way their species showed respect. Katie felt heat rise in her face. Vexter stepped forward. I owe you my life, human, he said loudly. I called you a coward, and I was the true coward for not seeing the wisdom in your preparation. He removed something from his belt. It was a medallion made of some golden metal. This is the Star of Valor, he said. My people award it to warriors who show exceptional courage. I have worn it for 20 years. Now it is yours. He placed it in Katie's hand. The weight was significant. Katie looked at the Viridian warrior and saw genuine respect in his eyes. I cannot accept this, she said. You must. Vexter replied, you earned it in blood. A crystalline being descended and hovered before Katie. We too wish to offer apology, it said. We called you primitive and fearful. Instead, you demonstrated wisdom we had forgotten. The value of caution, even in times of peace. More delegates came forward, each offering their own thanks or apologies. Or gifts. Katie accepted them all with growing discomfort. She had done her job. Nothing more. Finally, the council elder spoke again. We have one more matter to address, it said. The tradition of disarmament at these summits was meant to promote trust. Instead, it created vulnerability. This council votes to change that tradition. Henceforth, all delegations may maintain reasonable security measures as they see fit. We named this the Morrison Protocol in honor of the one who taught us this lesson. Katie blinked. They were changing centuries-old traditions. Because of her, Ambassador Clark stepped forward. The United Earth government wishes to propose a new treaty, she said. We offer to provide security consultation and training to any species that requests it. What humanity lacks in ancient wisdom, we may compensate for with tactical expertise. The council murmured. Several delegates immediately expressed interest. The session continued with formal votes and treaty discussions. Katie was allowed to step aside, and she gratefully did so. Chris Bennett found her in a quiet alcove. You are famous now, he said with a grin. Every news service in the galaxy is running stories about the human who saved the summit. Katie groaned. That is the last thing I wanted. Too bad, Chris replied cheerfully. You are a symbol now, whether you like it or not. Over the next week, Katie watched as humanity's position in galactic society shifted dramatically. The trade agreement's ambassador, Clark, had struggled to secure suddenly materialized species that had ignored humans, now sought meetings. Military delegations requested demonstrations of human combat techniques. Katie was asked to give presentations at 3 different alien military academies. She declined all of them. Her report to Earth Command was simple and factual. She left out her own injuries and focused on tactical lessons learned. The response came back with a promotion and orders to establish humanity's first interstellar security training program. Katie read the orders twice, then requested a transfer back to active fleet duty. Instead, Commander Webb called her to his office. You are turning down a promotion? He asked incredulously. Sir, I am a soldier, not an instructor, Katie replied. The galaxy needs teachers right now more than soldiers. Then find someone else to teach. Webb studied her. You still do not see it, do you? He said. See what, sir? What you accomplished here was not just tactical, Webb explained. You showed every species in the galaxy that humans value preparation over pride, that we protect others even when mocked for it, that we stand by our principles regardless of social pressure. Katie shifted uncomfortably. I just did my job. Exactly, Webb said, and in doing so you define what humanity's job will be in galactic society. We are The ones who remember that peace requires vigilance. Katie thought about that. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. I would rather be in the field than behind a desk teaching theory. Webb laughed. Fair enough, he said. I will propose a compromise. You lead a mobile training unit that deploys to different worlds. Teach through practical exercises and field demonstrations. Katie considered it that she could live with. Yes, sir, she said. I accept. The final day of the summit brought a closing ceremony. Katie stood with the human delegation wearing her newly repaired armor. This time, nobody laughed. Several other species had adopted similar protective gear. The Viridians now posted armed guards at all diplomatic functions. The crystalline beings had implemented new security scanning procedures. Even the insectoid Chorus had developed rapid response defense protocols. Vexter approached as the ceremony ended. Your people are leaving tomorrow? He asked. Yes, Katie confirmed. I hope we meet again. The Viridian said, perhaps next time as allies rather than as teacher and stubborn student. Katie smiled. I would like that. She walked through the station. One final time. The place where she had been mocked, where she had fought, where she had proven that preparation and principle mattered more than popularity. Ambassador Clark joined her. Ready to go home? Clark asked. Katie looked out. The viewport at the stars. Home is wherever the job takes me, she said. Right now the job is out there. They boarded the transport together. As the ship pulled away from the station, Katie took one last look. She had come here as an unknown. Captain from an unknown species. She left as something different, a symbol of human values, a reminder that caution is not cowardice, and that the hardest battles are sometimes fought by simply refusing to compromise on what matters. Armor had been scorched and pierced and battered, but it had held, just like her convictions, and that made all the difference.